Hello, I'm Siobhan Heanue. Welcome to the Culture Quarter. Coming up on this episode, could this be the final chapter of the history wars?
The individual stories help us to see history not in these kind of big opposing camps, but as something much more personal and rich.
But first, he was known as the father of Australian ornithology, having catalogued the country's feathered inhabitants while its geography was still being charted. John Gould also lent his name to the Gould League, which saw thousands of Australian schoolchildren introduced to the wondrous world of bird life. But an astute business mind lay behind his famous artworks, and a new book published by the National Library takes a look at how the English naturalist and his artist wife made their fortune.
Gould was the son of a gardener. He didn't come from the aristocracy or the upper middle classes of Britain in his time. He was of humble origins, but he was always, in later life, he reflected on his early love of animals. Gardeners also had sidelines in things like taxidermy, and they used to stuff animals and things like that, and he very quickly became an adept at stuffing animals. And in fact, his father was working in a property near Eton College, and he used to sell the schoolboys of Eton stuffed animals and birds for their own little private collections.
John Gould was genuinely and deeply passionate about the natural world, but he also had a natural flair for business. The Business of Nature by Roslyn Russell charts his journey from gardener's son to famed stalwart of scientific discovery and documentation. After learning skills by his father's side, the young John Gould was springboarded into a career that would take him around the world.
And by very good fortune met a lady who was as keen on natural history as he was.
That woman was Elizabeth Coxon, later to become Gould's wife and colleague.
As a governess, she'd been taught the accomplishments that young ladies were, and she could draw. And John decided that he would branch out from stuffing animals into actually depicting them and using the new technique of lithography. And Elizabeth was his first artist, because he was not himself a particularly good artist. He was a very good observer. He was an extraordinary capacity for noting the characteristics of animals and birds. And he would do a rough sketch and then have it translated into the beautiful high-quality prints that were required for natural history illustration. She was clearly as committed to his vision of what they could do together. She did it when she was expecting babies. She did it after she lost babies, things like that.
And she did it at the furthest corners of the earth. Gould travelled to Australia at the insistence of Charles Darwin.
Darwin had used John's services with some of the taxonomic work on the birds he brought back from the Galapagos Islands, the finches, that was so crucial to Darwin's theory of evolution. Obviously said to him, look, there's a rich field of endeavour in Australia and you should go there.
Gould travelled far and wide to observe animals in their natural surroundings, taking notes not just on what they looked like, but how they behaved. No detail went unnoticed.
He would accompany explorers. He accompanied Sturt on some of his expeditions around the Murray area. He also went out into the back blocks of Tasmania. She didn't go on those expeditions. She stayed, at this point, she was expecting another child, and she was actually staying in Government House in Hobart as a guest of Lady Franklin and Sir John Franklin. And so she would stay put, and John went on expeditions actually with Lady Franklin right down to the west coast of Tasmania to try and look at the remote areas of Tasmania. So it was a pretty wild place.
It was hard, time-consuming work, and Gould was an exacting master. But it was a profitable venture in an era when there was a thirst for new discoveries and natural curiosities back home in Europe. The final product was a stunning series of volumes documenting the birds and animals of Australia. Each image was delicately illustrated by hand and then coloured by a team of artists. There was only ever one edition and they were subscribed to before publication, making them highly anticipated and rather rare.
They certainly were a luxury item, but they were the kinds of things that you would have if you were a well-to-do member of the aristocracy or the upper middle classes who was interested in natural history, and many of these people were. They had their own cabinets of curiosities, their own little private museums and zoos. This would be another item that you would show to your friends when they came for dinner. You didn't show a video or a DVD. You brought out your treasures. You brought out your collection or your beautiful prints. So they would have been a prestige item.
Gould's work made him wealthy. His business now was applied to every aspect of the project. He even sold off the stuffed birds he'd used as models after he was finished with them. What the couple left behind was a record that to this day remains a strikingly accurate account of Australian wildlife.
This could be the honey eater that sits on my callistemon in my backyard. It's so lifelike, it's so true. To emerge at the other end was something that someone here in the 21st century can say, that looks like the bird in my backyard.
The National Museum of Australia has opened a new gallery that tells some of the landmark tales of Australian history. During the so-called history wars of the Howard era, critics called for changes to some of the museum's displays. That was 8 years ago, and yet the museum is only just embarking on the long process of regeneration.
It was a battle that brought politics straight into the capital's cultural heart.
Enjoy the museum? Yeah! That's very good.
In 2003, some board members said the new museum wasn't telling Australian history properly. A commissioned report wasn't quite as scathing, but it criticised the profusion of objects and the lack of chronology. An original display was pulled out, and today its replacement, called Landmarks, has opened.
I think over the past 10 years we've developed a much more mature sense of Australia's history. It's a connected history. There's lots of Indigenous stories in this exhibition interwoven with settler stories.
There's a strong focus on farming and on mining as the forces that built Australia. A new object is this 15-ton rock shovel, still encrusted with dirt from Rio Tinto's mines. There are displays on the gold rushes, convict history and the Opera House.
With monumental relics as well as multimedia displays, the museum has tried to answer some of its critics, as well as keep moving forward with the times. It already has the prime spot right by the lake in the middle of Canberra, but there's still a lot of work ahead before it can stamp its place in the heart of all Australians.
And it's up to the task.
Great thing about us being a younger museum that's still growing and developing is that we've kind of got a great openness about the way we can interpret objects.
The individual stories help us to see history not in these kind of big opposing camps, but as something much more personal and rich.
Rich veins of a story that's still being told.
Now to another artist with a deep love of nature, but you've probably never heard of her, and her story is tinged with sadness. Charlotte Atkinson came to Australia in 1826, and she endured her fair share of traumas in the colony before authoring Australia's first children's book in 1841.
For years, Charlotte Atkinson's book lay in a drawer in the home of her great-great-great-granddaughter.
Just sat in my filing cabinet and I looked at it at odd times and that was that.
Slowly, Janet Gow began to realise its worth. 31 pages of detailed drawings of flora, fauna and local Aborigines. It was a labour of love for her daughter Emily's birthday in 1843.
Oh, it must have taken hours and hours and hours to do.
Charlotte Atkinson came to Australia in 1826. She married a prominent landholder and had 4 children. After that, her luck turned for the worse. Her husband died, her second husband was an abusive alcoholic, and she was raped by bushrangers. But that didn't dent her creative spirit. In 1841, she wrote the first children's book to be published in Australia. She's not as well known as her daughter Louisa, a writer and naturalist.
One of the things that the family have always been sorry about is the fact that Charlotte's just ignored.
But the book of drawings from 1843 that went under the hammer today could change all that.
30.
I think with this book we can start to see that Charlotte Atkinson is more than just a guiding light for her daughter Louisa, but perhaps is part and parcel of her daughter's entire oeuvre.
No further advance at $70,000. You're all done, or finished at $70,000.
The $70,000 price tag is slightly less than the family had been hoping for. Their wish now is that the buyer will display the work in public. The family say it's time the true legacy of Charlotte Atkinson was recognised.
Well, that's all for this episode. We'll leave you with a glimpse of a spectacular surrealism exhibition at the Gallery of Modern Art, or GOMA, in Brisbane. I'm Siobhan Hinu, and you can join me next time on the Culture Quarter.